All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today I am joined by Dave Choate, the head honcho over at the Falcoholic. We're going to be talking about Titans tight end Anthony Firkser, now an Atlanta Falcons tight end. Later in the episode, we'll be joined by Locked On Titans host Tyler Rowland once again, and he'll give us the lowdown on Firkser as well. And we'll also get Dave's thoughts on the Falcons offseason and whether or not there is pressure for the team to take a quarterback at the top of this 2022 draft.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman. Been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans. RIP, still going strong on Twitter at FalcFans. It's been a while, but I'm technically a contributor to the Falcoholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons, and of course, the host of this world-renowned Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And of course, we thank everyone that makes Locked On Falcons their first listen. And of course, you can find Locked On Falcons, just like all the other Locked On Sports Atlanta podcasts, like Locked On Hawks, Locked On Braves, A to Z with Mark Zeno, on your favorite podcast platform, Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Falcons YouTube channel. So here, of course, with Dave Choate once again. We often have Dave on right before the draft to sort of get us focused on what we need to be focused on. And a lot of today's episode is going to be focused on whether or not the Falcons are going to be focused on, and I've already used that word focus too many times in a sentence, on a quarterback. But first, Dave, let's talk about the latest addition the Falcons made. And it seems a dueling between ex-Lions, ex-Titans, and ex-Bears. And now we have another ex-Titan in Anthony Firkser, the tight end. What are your thoughts on that signing?
Well, they're going to have to keep going if they want to catch up with all the ex-Bears, but I think, step in the right direction here. For me, like, Firkser was a guy that every time I looked at, like, impending free agents, thought about who they might sign, it was like, this guy's a no-brainer, right? Like, Arthur Smith likes him. He had his best season with Arthur Smith, obviously not quite as successful a year ago, kind of as the top option at tight end for the Titans. So just seemed like a logical fit. I think all offseason I've had little arguments with Falcons fans who have said to me, we have Kyle Pitts. Why do we need a pass catching tight end? Kyle Pitts plays quite a bit of receiver. You're going to want to use more than one guy who can catch the football, hopefully. And we're not quite sure that Braden Lenius, is it Lenius or Lenius?
Lenius, let's go with that. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, him. We're not sure he's going to come in and do anything this first year over from the CFL. So to me, it's you're sending Terry Fontenot to the store with $10, and he's coming back with 20 cans of beans, and it's not very exciting. But you can make a good meal out of that many beans, I guess. So and Firkser is good beans. Pretty good route runner. Good hands. I think he'll be pretty successful here. I think obviously after last year with not really figuring out how to use Hayden Hurst effectively in this offense, I think somebody he's familiar with will be good for Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I do worry about the Falcons' gastrointestinal tract with all those beans that they'll be eating, but
yeah,
we'll see how that turns out for it. But I think you pointed it out. One of my frequent criticisms of Arthur Smith in his offense last year was when we went down with some of those receivers, it was run your offense through the tight end and the running back position. We saw that with Kyle Pitts and Cordell Patterson, but it always felt like there was a lot more meat on the bones when it came to Hayden Hurst and him primarily seemingly being asked to block when that was kind of the weakest part of his game and utilizing him as a pass catcher. And so it's fair to wonder, will we see that repeat itself with Firkser, who again is not necessarily a blocker, but more of a pass catcher. But given the familiarity, you feel like Arthur Smith can utilize, because basically that's what he was when Arthur Smith was there, was the number 2 tight end that was a very effective pass catcher. And so you say, okay, well, he did it before, so you don't necessarily have to feel as concerned. Maybe there was some sort of disconnect between him and Hurst that led to that not necessarily working. So I look forward to seeing what Anthony Firkser can do in this Falcons uniform. And we may be in a similar situation where you may want to run your passing game through the tight end position and the running back position. And, when you look at the Falcons, weapons right now, you'd probably say Kyle Pitts is one, Cordero Patterson's two, and then Anthony Firkser is probably your third best receiving option. So, I know that, maybe some of those beans, when you put it like that, you say, man, these beans might be a little past their due date or whatever the case may be. But it's something. So if you're not going to have great wide receivers, upgrade that tight end position is basically the moral of the story, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
So with that being said, we'll talk a little bit more with Anthony Firkser later in the episode with Locked On Titans host Tyler Rowland. But before we get into that, I want to get Dave's thoughts on the offseason moves and really hone in on, whether or not there's some pressure for the Falcons to take a quarterback like, say, Malik Willis at the top of the draft. And we'll get Dave's thoughts on that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons podcast. But before we get there, guys, I do want to remind you that Locked On Falcons, just like Locked On Braves, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, is now part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And of course, on Locked On Sports Atlanta, you can find 3 new shows devoted to all of Atlanta sports. You're still getting Locked On Falcons and Locked On Hawks and Locked On Braves and all those various things, but they're covering all of Atlanta sports as well as some of the big national headlines. That's A to Z with Mark Zinno. That's Hitting Hard with John Chuckery, and ATL Day Ones with Jarvis Davis and Tanitra Batiste. And you can find them all on Locked On Sports Atlanta on your preferred podcast platform, as well as on YouTube. And guys, I also want to tell you about Shady Rays, an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. And what are those features, you're probably asking? Well, what do you think about polarized lenses, durable frames, and premium high-end finishes? And there's also something that you won't find anywhere else, and that's Shady Rays' insane protection program, which includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They'll send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened, and you can give it a try. And if you don't love Shady Rays sunglasses, you'll pay nothing. It's that simple. And in addition to looking good, you can also help fund a good cause, because every order at Shady Rays, they donate 10 meals to fight hunger in America. So head to shadyrays.com. Use the promo code Locked On, and you'll get 50% off of 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On for the best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses. So joined here by Dave Choate of the Falcoholic, and we're talking Falcons offseason moves. And, thanks to the Anthony Firkser decision, we had to spend a good chunk of today's episode talking about the Falcons' brand new tight end. And so we were originally going to go deeper on some of these issues. But, Dave, looking at the offseason, I've been very vocal on being kind of lukewarm on this offseason. And I wonder, obviously the Falcons cater their offseason moves to make me happy. But I do wonder that it seems like that's kind of the general consensus, is just kind of like, as you put it, a bunch of beans that they're adding, $1.39 cans of beans. But does that now put pressure on the team to kind of have to really sort of move the needle and nail this draft? And does that now put pressure on in one of the ways that you can sort of re-grab those headlines and get people talking and generating that buzz that you haven't necessarily done, is potentially pulling the trigger on a quarterback at the top of the draft? And I can't help but think and look back at the team's interest in Deshaun Watson, which surprised us all at the time, and think that Deshaun Watson checks a lot of the same boxes that, say, someone like Malik Willis, who a lot of people really like in this draft class, checks. He's local to Atlanta area, has, incredible physical tools, mobility, athleticism. He wears the number 7. The last time a Falcons quarterback wore that number, a lot of people got a lot of excited. So I'm just curious, where are you on the Falcons offseason? Where are you on the sort of mounting pressure for the draft? And where are you on the idea of the Falcons taking a quarterback?
Yeah, in a vacuum, I look at this offseason as solid. I think, again, given their budget constraints, I've liked most of the guys they've gotten. And I think they've largely stuck to the let's not go into the draft with any, needs that we can't live without addressing type of philosophy. So, on its own, it's a fine offseason. If you had taken away the Watson pursuit and the Ridley suspension and all of these things that kind of flipped everything upside down. Free agency's been really solid. I think if you back it up a little bit, to your question, like, is there some pressure on them to really nail the draft, right? Yes, because I think if you're looking at it, I think we're all assuming that this is a team that's not going to win a lot of games this year. And that's 5 straight losing seasons for the Falcons. And that's after, a 2017 year that was really frustrating and up and down, even though, great playoff win and some fun times there. But this team hasn't been right in a long time. And I think there's a ton of pressure on them to nail the draft because you can't fill a stadium with the promise of cap space alone, right? Like, I know plenty of fans, myself included, who think they'll spend that money pretty wisely. It'll make a big difference for them, but you're not going to turn your team around purely by having $100 million in cap space next year, especially if you have Marcus Mariota and Felipe Franks under center, and you're sort of counting on losing enough games or having the draft capital, I guess, to move up and get the guy you absolutely have to have next year. I think it's a dicey thing for this team to have pursued Watson, making a lot of people unhappy, missed on Watson, which made other people unhappy, have no long-term plan at quarterback, traded away a franchise icon in Matt Ryan. And then you're going to say, next year, we'll figure out the quarterback thing. And look at all the cap space we've got. Like, I don't feel like that's a convincing story for anybody at this point. And I think, I know plenty of people are horrified at the thought of getting any of the quarterbacks from this draft class because they think for one reason or another, they're not worth it. And I get that. But at the same time, if you look at where this team is going, can they make it 6 straight losing seasons? If they invest all that time and energy next year and they're still not that great and they don't wind up with a credible long-term guy at quarterback, and then you're looking at God knows how long to turn it around. Potentially you're looking at, this regime being flipped over, or at least the coaching staff. And that's an awfully big risk to me to not have something to get the fan base a little bit excited about. And that's where I don't know if it'll be Willis. I think Willis, for a lot of reasons, like you said, fits the bill. He is local. He has a ton of potential. You can probably park him on the bench most of the year behind Mariota and go into next year hopefully feeling good about him starting, and you still kind of have Mariota as an option. But to me, this is a year that if you like any of these guys, if you like more than one of these guys, you kind of have to make it happen, even if it'll initially make people unhappy, because you have to sell fans on a long-term vision for a team that hasn't had a short-term, plan for anything that we've seen, or a long-term plan in a really long time. 5 straight losing seasons is a tough pill to swallow when we were used to, from 2008 to 2016, at least some baseline level of competence most years, and we're just not getting it. So to me, there's a lot of pressure on them, to either put themselves in a great position to draft one of the top guys next year, which, I mean, maybe they do that without tanking, quote unquote, because they're going to be so bad. But, or you have to have a guy that you can point to and say, 2023, next year, when we make these huge investments in the team, look, we nailed this last draft class. We drafted well, we got starters, we got guys you feel good about, and we have our long-term quarterback situation figured out. Like, that's how you're going to pull people back in. And I think to wait until 2023, uncertain if you're going to be able to get the guy you really love, is probably not something this team is in a position to do.
I think you summarized it perfectly. And, I've expressed my doubts on Malik Willis on previous episodes of the podcast on whether or not his upside is as high as it is often billed to be. I think he certainly has the upside to be one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, but I'm not quite as convinced as others that it's like on the Josh Allen level of potential. But it is one of those things where, like, my personal opinion is that I would like to see the team sort of wait. Like, I want them to take a quarterback this year, but I don't want them to force taking a quarterback like you would potentially have to do by taking Malik Willis at the top of the draft, because he's certainly not going to be there in round 2. I would like to see the team wait and show that they do have a vision, because one of my criticisms of this regime over the last 14 months has been they just feel like they're kind of making it up as they go. And so if they were firmly committed to, yes, we actually do believe CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or somebody else in next year's class is better than these quarterbacks, we're going to wait. We're going to tank for Tua, so to speak, and we're going to be bad this year, and we understand that, and we'll go get our guy next year. I would like to see that, but I think you laid it out where it's going to be a tough pill to swallow, that you're basically going to probably have, a bunch of empty seats this year. And you do wonder, again, going back to that Deshaun Watson conversation, how much of that was Deshaun Watson is a really good quarterback, and how much of that is Deshaun Watson's going to energize his fan base and get butts back in the seats. And so, because I don't necessarily know the answer to that, like I kind of lean, because I'm just naturally cynical, towards the second version of that. So
yeah.
So it's one of those things where, like, I am, despite my skepticism of Malik Willis and his potential in this league, I have basically spent the last week making peace with the idea that he's probably going to be the pick. And I will spend the next 2 weeks continuing to make peace with that. And, there are some, bright spots and silver linings to that. We won't get into that all on today's episode, but that would be something that if you're game for that on the Locked On Falcons, you can look forward to more of that conversation over the next 2 weeks. But with that being said, Dave, let's talk a little bit more about, this draft class and everybody that, covers the Falcons that has been on recently. I like to ask them sort of, are there some players that you kind of have your eyes on? I know, Dave, you still constantly get crap for the Jadeveon Clowney and Glenn Dorsey takes from many years ago, which you're not alone in that. Like, literally everybody I talked to those off seasons wanted Glenn Dorsey and Jadeveon Clowney, but for some reason you become the poster child for that. But maybe this time, the Falcons will actually do the thing that you want them to do and go out and get there. Are there any players, whether it's early in the draft or later in the draft, that you sort of have your eyes on as, I would like to see that guy in Atlanta?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I feel like I'm doing the Glenn Dorsey and Brian Braum thing all over again, because kind of my ideal scenario for this draft is still Thibodeau making it to 8. And I know that, there are question marks, and I think some of them are legitimate around Thibodeau as a prospect. But I do think that he has insane potential. My love for edge rushers and my desire to see them drafted early by the Falcons is well known, and it's not going anywhere. So, I would really like to see that happen. And then I would love to see them, even if it requires a little bit of a hop up. I have really come to like Desmond Ridder, and I think that he is the guy. If you aren't sold on Willis in the top 10, or you can't get him for one reason or another, I would love to see Ridder in Atlanta. I think he's just so technically sound. I think he could step right in and be very good from day one, and I think very good long term in a competent offense that is coached well and surrounded by playmakers, which maybe that's a pipe dream, so we can table that one. But so again, I find myself saying maybe you wait a little bit and still get who I think is a really good quarterback and get that potentially elite defender. And if that works out like Glenn Dorsey and Brian Braum, then I've set myself up for the next decade plus of getting crap for that. But that's okay. That's kind of where I'm at, I guess, in the late going. And a guy that's actually intrigued me late in the draft is somebody that the Falcons have been linked to, which is Charles Wiley, I believe is his name. And Kevin Knight at our site interviewed him recently. Just an interesting prospect. And again, like, just give me as many edge rushers as you possibly can. So
there you go. Okay. Well, Dave, that will do it for us here today with you. I'll give you a chance to go ahead and plug, in addition to Kevin's interview with Charles Wiley, what are some of the other things going on at Falcoholic that don't include me not writing a column this offseason?
Well, we're trying to keep the trackers all up to date. We've got a draft guide with all our coverage in it. We've got a kind of draft interest tracker that I'm trying to keep up with. There's a lot of, I don't know if this is a top 30 visit or not, type of stuff that we'll hopefully get some clarity on. And then, of course, the very long list of beans, the free agent tracker. So make sure, if you're checking out the site, that you visit all those. We keep them up to date as much as we can. And got a good column coming tomorrow by Alan Stirk, just kind of covering how critical it is for this team to show some level of improvement this year, even if it's not reflected in the record. So should be a good read. And of course, look forward to the Aaron Freeman column, TBD.
Well, maybe I'll write, before and after, getting on board with the idea of taking Malik Willis. That might be actually a pretty good column to write.
I would read that. Yeah.
All right. So, well, Dave, appreciate you joining me. I look forward to probably a post-draft chat, or maybe we'll get you back on before the draft. You can never know with the Falcons. Something crazy might happen. So, this has been a crazy offseason, so I won't put it past it. But certainly we'll be chatting soon about this draft class at some point in the next several weeks. So I look forward to that. Thank you for coming on today's episode. And before we duck out of here with Dave, I want to let you guys know that, again, coming up, we're going to be wrapping up today's episode talking with Locked On Titans host Tyler Rowland about Anthony Firkser. But before we get there, guys, I do want to talk a little bit more about the Locked On Podcast Network's draft coverage. There will be 3 days of live draft coverage on the Locked On NFL Draft live YouTube channel. And of course, in the days leading up, starting next Monday, I believe, you can also check out the annual Ultimate Mock Draft, where all the hosts of the Locked On shows, including folks like Tyler and myself, you sort of pick who we sort of want our favorite teams, or the teams that we cover, to pick. And I will give you guys a spoiler alert. I do not pick Malik Willis in that mock draft. So go check out who we pick, or who I pick, and I will let you guys know that is not someone that is often mocked to the Falcons, but I'm sure you guys will have a lot of fun with that. And of course, that ultimate mock draft begins next Monday, and runs all week long, pick by pick throughout the first round. So, guys, we got more to come on today's episode, including insight from Locked On Titans host Tyler Rowland about Anthony Firkser, and maybe some of the innovative ways that head coach Arthur Smith can both incorporate Firkser and Kyle Pitts into the Falcons offense. But before we get there, guys, I want to tell you about Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes just like a candy bar, but it's even better than a candy bar, because Built Bars not only taste good, they're good for you because they're low in sugar, calories, and carbs, high in protein and fiber. And there's nothing better than waking up in the morning to a blueberry muffin. But unlike real blueberry muffins, Built Bar blueberry muffin flavor is healthy for you, covered in 100% real chocolate. And in addition to getting that blueberry muffin first thing in the morning, Built Bar has been all about their puff flavors. Puffs are their first protein-infused marshmallow. You can get the yellow chirps if you're into sort of the Easter peep season. You can also get raspberry cheesecake, as well as churro puff, coconut marshmallow, and so much more. Get a mixed box of puffs, or get a mixed box of all the other tried and true flavors like salted caramel, double chocolate, coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, and so much more by heading over to built.com. And when you do, use the promo code LOCK15 and you'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, guys, you're Locked On Falcons. And once again, for the umpteenth, the 30th time this offseason, you are also Locked On Titans, as my guy Tyler Rowland comes on Locked On Falcons to give us the breakdown on some former Titans player that is now with the Atlanta Falcons. And of course, today we are talking about tight end Anthony Firkser. Tyler, welcome back to the show. As I say every time we talk, probably won't be the last time we talk about a former Titans joining the Atlanta Falcons, but welcome back, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me back. And it seems like there's a little bit of a trend going on, but now you know what it means.
Dirty bird.
It's dirty bird time. Yeah. But all jokes aside, obviously the pipeline is there. Dean Pease feels very comfortable seeing, some role players head over there as well, who Arthur Smith feels comfortable. And Anthony Firkser had, the best moments of his, early career with Art running the show. So it makes sense he'd want to get him back in the fold for a specific role, especially if they want to, be a little more creative with Kyle Pitts.
Yeah. The thing with Firkser, as I understand it, and watching him over the years in Tennessee when I've gotten a chance to see him, and he always seemed to pop, particularly in January, these last couple of years. But it seems like a very, effective receiver athletic type of guy that, on those rollouts and those leaks and whatnot was very effective. I'm curious, in addition to his receiving skill that you can sort of explain a little bit further, what was he bringing anything to the table as a blocker, or is he more of a true pass catcher at that tight end position?
I guess the easy answer to your question is no. In my opinion, if I were a Falcons fan, I would look at it like we got a thicker Cole Beasley, or we got a bigger Julian Edelman. Not that talent level, but that's the way that Firkser plays football. He'll get down the seam. He's tough. He'll take shots and get down the seam and catch the ball. But mostly he's trying to fit in between holes and zones and sit down, quick out, quick in, get the ball, catch the ball. He doesn't give you a lot of yards after the catch ability, and he's not going to really give you anything when it comes to blocking. And that's why I mentioned maybe doing something a little different with Kyle Pitts, because Anthony Firkser is basically a big slot. If you want to look at, I know Emory Hunt, I think, was talking about this recently, how he has 4 different positions within wide receiver, and one of them is like a big slot type guy, which some of these tight ends, like a Greg Dulcich, he might consider them an inside guy, I think is the term that he was using. Anthony Firkser is that sort of player who will play on third downs, maybe on second and long, and he can play as a big slot and sit down in his zone, catch the ball, fall down, give you a first down, which is where he had his best moments with the Titans, especially in January. Like you're saying, when the rest of the logical defense is saying, who cares about Anthony Firkser? We need to stop Kyle Pitts. We need to stop Garrett Wilson, Drake London, blah, 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 whatever happens. And then Firkser can find his little nooks and crannies over the middle of the field.
Okay. So, obviously I know you're not necessarily expert on the Falcons, but you talk about using Kyle Pitts a little differently. I'd like to see you explain that a little bit. Do you think that means the Falcons try to use Kyle Pitts a little bit more as an inline tight end, or is that, potentially in your eyes, maybe you see Kyle Pitts more being a true wide receiver like we saw flashes of last year as an outside threat?
I guess why not both? That's kind of, I think Kyle Pitts could be used how Darren Waller is in Vegas, where, they isolate him on one side, run a trips with the wide receivers to one side. Heck, if you want to do this, and this is what we're talking about, formation versatility. Now, some teams will catch on and adjust their personnel, but the Falcons could come out there in a 2 tight end set, like a twin set, where they have 2 wide receivers to one side, single back formation, 2 tight ends on one side, Kyle Pitts in line next to the tackle, and then Anthony Firkser as that, flanked off the line of scrimmage tight end. And then they could shift out to a trip set where they got Firkser as the inside wide receiver and a trips to a left, and you got Kyle Pitts isolated to the right as a boundary receiver with, let's say, a team that plays heavy man coverage, and now you got a linebacker one-on-one outside against Kyle Pitts. So you can use your formations to create matchups that you want with a guy like Firkser, with a guy like Kyle Pitts, where you get the formation and the defense in a lower, more physical formation. But because of the versatile talents of those 2 guys, those 2 tight ends, you can create a bunch of different formations out of it and create matchups depending on what the defense is giving you. So I guess they could do both of those things. And it just really, to me, I don't know what's going to succeed, and I'm sure they're going to find out, but the freedom of the versatility that Arthur Smith now has with his formations because of a guy like Anthony Firkser may allow for some cool scenarios, I guess, for some of the weapons in Atlanta.
Okay, well, Tyler, you sold me, so I'm good on that. Hopefully, the listeners and viewers are also good on that. So go ahead, Tyler. I mean, again, I'm sure I'll give you the floor to plug whatever you're talking about on Locked On Titans, but it's basically the same thing because you were on the podcast, I don't know, 4 days ago or whatever it was. So I'm sure there's not a whole lot has changed in those last couple of days, but let the people know where they can find your stuff and what some of the things that you're talking about on Locked On Titans, and maybe you'll be talking about some other future Falcons in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, I actually think this is probably the best time of the year for anybody who's not a Titans fan to actually check out my podcast. Of course, I'm on Twitter at Tic Tac Titans, saying all kinds of nonsense all the time because it's Twitter and it's a great time. But last year I went through 186 prospects in the 3 weeks leading up to the draft. Went through 23 wide receiver prospects, in-depth scouting reports on my show that released on Wednesday morning podcast, Tuesday night on YouTube. So I'm doing in-depth scouting breakdowns on a bunch of different guys. I went through 10 quarterbacks, double-digit running backs, going to continue going through all those things. So if you just want to maybe listen to me talk more about some of these prospects, I'm breaking down every position in depth and a large amount of people on the show over the next few weeks. So Locked On Titans podcast, if there's any one position or multiple that you really want to hear way too much conversation about.
Okay, there you have it. Great plug there, Tyler. Appreciate you coming back on the podcast on such short notice, and I'm sure you'll be, hanging by the phone, ready to do another Locked On Falcons in the future when the Falcons make their next former Titans edition.
Yeah, I basically put it in my calendar every day, like Falcon conversation, because I just figure they're just coming all the time. But either way, thanks a lot, Aaron. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right. So, guys, that's going to do it for us here on today's Locked On Falcons episode. And tomorrow we should be joined, I believe, by Jarvis Davis, one of the co-hosts of the ATL Day Ones podcast on the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast feed. And for those of you guys that aren't quite sure what this Locked On Sports Atlanta stuff that we've been, promoting over the last week since it launched on April 1st, basically, the quick summary is Locked On's version of your typical sort of sports talk. Obviously, these are 3 different shows covering Atlanta sports as well as, national headlines. So you get, thoughts on the Masters or WrestleMania and other topics. And they're covering not just the Falcons, but the Braves, the Hawks, all these various things, as well as those national headlines. And you're getting 3 different personalities: Mark Zinno, John Chuckery, Jarvis Davis, and Tanitra Batiste. And you can, check out one of the shows if you like one of the personalities and how they cover it. Or you can check out all 3 of them and get, sort of different angles. You can check out Locked On Falcons as your first listen each and every day and get my thoughts on sort of the latest on the Falcons. You'll often get very different perspectives from Mark or Jarvis or Tanitra or John on their various shows. So definitely check out Locked On Sports Atlanta if you haven't already, to get sort of a different flavor, a different style of coverage of these local Atlanta and Georgia based football teams and sports teams, I should say, not football teams. Although, football is the sport that I'm most interested in. But, if you're interested in baseball and basketball, then certainly that's the place for you. So check out Locked On Sports Atlanta on your preferred podcast platform or on YouTube. And guys, also check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast if you want to get more insight into this ongoing draft process. Of course, Eric Crocker and Ryan Tracy have you covered as well on there. And of course, Locked On NFL Draft is free and available on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons, including on Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and YouTube.